This video is a part of a free chapter from my new course, The Blendinator. Click the links in the description to learn more. Okay, so in the last two videos, we have made a couple different masks. We have our two-dimensional mask here, our black and white mask with the circles that will be used to mask out the blue markers on my face. We made them with two-dimensional splines with all of these mask layers that you see and the mask animation keyframe timeline, which I don't like, but nevertheless, we did it, and this is what we have. And then we also did one using our 3D motion. And we built geometry and we made these little circles over the same blue markers on my face. And we did that so much faster. We used geometry nodes. We used several different tips and tricks to line everything up. And if we show the overlays here, this is what that looks like. If we scrub through, you can see that indeed those are all covering that. And you can see my nose here, and that is because if we go to material preview mode, it is actually using a holdout shader so that when my head turns, the nose blocks out the markers behind it. Because if we didn't have that, if we hide that, you can still see those markers peeking through my nose there. But we did utilize the back face culling, so we don't see the back faces. So when my head turns, those back faces are invisible, which makes so much less work for us. In fact, we didn't even have to animate the individual circles. We did add this lattice so that we could adjust it just a little bit as we went, but we only added 2 keyframes to that. I think we added a couple keyframes also on the nose, and that is for the shape keys so that when the head turned, it stayed the shape of the nose. So anyway, that was all done in the past couple videos, and now is the time where we can use these masks to actually remove the markers on my face. So let's go to the compositing workspace here. And what we see here is actually nodes that were automatically set up with our scene. And in fact, something that I didn't do before is it created this foreground and background, which I don't need. So I'm just going to switch this to background and then X to delete that. And then foreground, I'm just going to change this to view layer. But it did all of this automatically when we did our motion tracking and setup tracking scene. One-click setup. So, but we don't need most of these. Actually, we don't need anything except for this movie clip right now. So we're just going to take all of these and X to delete those. And I'm going to get rid of this backdrop. I'm going to pull out another area over here and change this to the image editor and make this the viewer node. So if I Control-Shift-Click, and that's with the Node Wrangler add-on. You should know what that is by now. And let's go ahead and bring in our mask, our two-dimensional mask. So Shift-A and go to Input and then Mask. So if I drop this here and then I scroll in and choose Mask, let's pull this out a little bit here, and then I connect this up, you can see this is our result, and that's the same thing that you see over here without our splines and then our overlay. And it should reflect exactly what we see here. So in here, we're going to use this information with our movie clip. And I'm sure by now you're familiar with black and white masks, but just a quick recap. If I add in a color alpha overnode and plug this in here, I'm going to disconnect this for a second. We have 2 image sockets, and the first image socket is what's on the bottom, and the second image socket is what's on the top. So it's kind of reverse order, and that is because it's order of operations. So this one is placed down first on our canvas, and then this one is placed down second on our canvas. So if I change the color of the first one, you can see that we don't see anything here because the white image is overlaying on top of that. So we've put the blue down first, and then we've put the white image over that. And then we have this factor slider here, and the factor always corresponds to the bottom image socket. So at a factor of 1, that's 100% white. And so if I put this at 0.5, this is 50% white showing through to the blue. And then if I bring this down, you can see if I go to 0, that's 0% white, and so we see the blue. So what we can do instead of the slider is put our mask in this place, and again our mask is going to tell us that everywhere there is white, we're going to show the bottom image. And in this case it is white, so it's going to be the same. It's going to be white dots over a blue background, just like that. Now we can change this color to any color we want. And now we have red over blue because the red is on top of the blue and we're telling it to put it everywhere there's a white circle. We can invert this by adding a color invert color. And what this does is switches these two around. So the way it does that, if we plug this in, is now the black and white have swapped places, and everywhere there's black, the red will be invisible, showing to the blue like this. And that is really horrendous to look at. Let's change that here. That's a little bit easier on the eyes. So how do we use this information with our movie clip? Well, for now, I'm just going to delete the invert color. So in place of the pink here, I'm going to put the movie clip image, which means that the movie clip is only going to be shown where the circles are. And this is a way we can isolate all of those blue markers on my face. And then what we can do is we can take another node here. So for example, we could do something like a filter blur and plug that in. Let's do fast Gaussian, and I'm just going to bump this up to something like 20. And so now we've isolated those blue markers and blurred them enough to where they don't look quite that blue anymore. And so what we can do is take the original movie clip and place it on the bottom where the blue is, and now we have the blurred markers overlaid on top of our original footage. Now, you can still see that the blur isn't actually doing a lot right now. We can make it a little bit better if we actually just duplicate this and put this up here. So that is going to smooth that out a little bit, but that's too much. So maybe we'll do something like 5. So it gets rid of the hard edge, maybe more like 10. So that smooths it into the skin a little bit more. However, it doesn't work in this situation because I did the markers completely wrong here. So let your lesson be learned. What you need to do instead is have small, tiny black dots on your face, because small, tiny black dots are going to smooth and be blurred into the background a lot better than huge blue dots on my face. And I could try to do, let's see, 10, nope, 50. So going up to 50 helps maybe a little bit up here, but this isn't going to work in this situation. I didn't realize it was actually going to be that much of a problem, but it's good because sometimes you're just going to get footage doing visual effects that you can't change or reshoot. So we're just going to have to power through this and figure out different ways to solve the problem. And one of those ways is using the in-paint node. And so by the way, the blur, just so you can see that looks like that. So here's our original mask and then our blur, which let's just make that 5 again, because we just really need the edges around those to be blurred. So I'm just going to control and right click and drag this disconnect. Just disconnect all of those here for now. I'm also going to disconnect this one. And then we're going to use the mask to set the alpha. So I'm going to search for a set alpha node. And we'll plug the movie clip into the image. And then we'll plug our mask into the alpha here. And let's see what we have here. Okay, so this is similar to what we had with our alpha over node where we isolated all of those markers, but we went the opposite of that. So let's take this and we'll do an invert node here again. Okay, and then so what this does is it cuts holes in our face. And then after all of this, what we can do is add in an in-paint node. And what this is going to do is it's going to sample all of the pixels around these circles and fill them in. So we're going to start to crank up the distance here. And as we do this, you can start to see something happening. And you have to go pretty high on the distance, depending on how large your circles are. So for example, here at 50, it's not quite enough. You can see that. So we can go all the way up to 80, I think should be good. But they still look pretty dark, and that doesn't look very good at all. So to fix that, let's change apply mask to replace alpha. And ta-da! That's already looking much, much better. Obviously, there are still some problems with it, but we're on the right track. So now we can actually combine what we had previously done with the blur to this here. So if we bring the alpha over node, we want our in-paint in on the bottom, and then we want our blurred image on the top. We can't see anything here because the factor is at 0, so we pull that all the way up. And that blurs the whole image because yes, of course it does. That's the purpose of this. But we need to plug something into the factor to tell it where to blur. So what do we use? We are going to use our mask. Now we need to use our original mask over here like this, but we actually want to use our original mask blurred. So I'm going to actually switch these. So I'm just going to take this one by Alt clicking and dragging, and then just move it over in between here. And the reason I did that is because I want the blurred mask without it being inverted. But when it comes through the chain, I still want it to be inverted. So we're going to take the blurred mask, plug that in. There we go. And then that softens those edges. But 50 is too much for the blur, so we're going to bring that back down to something like 20. And this is still not working right because, of course, I don't want the original image blurred. I want the in-painted image blurred. So we're going to plug the in-painted image to the blur. And there we go. So now this is before. So this is just our in-paint. And this is our in-paint plus the blur. And now you can see that's getting much, much more smooth. And if I scroll out, you can't even tell hardly, maybe some around the beard. But this is starting to look much more promising. And we can maybe even bring this down to something like 15. And we can maybe even bump this one up to 10. Okay, no, that really doesn't work. So we'll keep that at 5. Okay, so while we're talking about blur and feathering, we can achieve a similar result like this and maybe even more control by using a different node. So if I just plug this in real quick here, just temporarily, and search for dilate erode node, put that here, and then it does exactly that. We can actually bring this up, that dilates those circles, and or we can erode. If we go into the negatives, we can make those circles smaller. And you have different modes. You have step, threshold. So you can see that the threshold has distance, and then it also has some sort of a fading effect or a feathering effect. We have just distance without the feathering effect, and then we also have a feather effect. So we can feather inwards, or we can feather outwards. We have a different fall off. We can do a sharp fall off. All the standard fall offs in Blender. Smooth is usually the best. I'm just going to put that down to 10, and that is very similar to this. Although maybe this can go -10 or +5, or maybe that threshold here. And in this case, I'm not sure. Well, let's. I'm going to plug this in here and see. Oh, and I gotta make sure I also plug it in here to get an actual result there. So we can do, let's say, -10, 20. That's a bit too much. I'm going to keep the blur for now, but just so you know, you have this as another option. So I'm just going to delete that. I'm going to plug this back in here. And then we've got to plug it in here as well. Okay, so let's take a look at what's happening here. Just recap. We've got our movie clip, of course. We start with that, and then we plug that into a set alpha, which, if we have this apply mask, it uses the inverse of our mask to cut holes in our face. And then we have an in-paint node, which we need to use with the replace alpha to make that look a little bit better. And then we have the in-paint node mixed with a blurred image of the in-paint node and put that on top of this only where our markers are. And if we scrub through our timeline, give it a second to update, and then you can see that it does update with each frame, and that is looking pretty good. We of course still have some problems that we'll fix, but you can see we've gotten a long way already. Now, of course, this can be done with the 3D mask as well. So remember, this was the 2D mask that we made in our masking with our splines. But instead of that, let's add in an input render layers. And then if we just plug this one in, we don't see anything. And this is something that is really annoying and not very apparent or intuitive in Blender. The reason we don't see anything here is because we need to go to the output properties, scroll all the way down in this obscure location that says post-processing, and then uncheck sequencer. If sequencer is checked, even though we don't have a video sequence editor workspace up here, for some reason, having sequencer checked will overwrite all of the render modes for the render layers. So we want to uncheck that. We want to keep compositing on because that's what we're doing now. And now if we press F12, now we can see the 3D mask that we have here. So this is from our view layer scene, which that's the name we changed to just a little bit ago. And if I hide our circles in the render and then press F12 again, you can see they're hidden. So this definitely is the 3D mask. So we just plug this in where this mask is, so right here, and then plug this one in. And now let's press F12 again, and we have a very similar result. The only difference is that when I move on the timeline here, if it's the 3D render layer, it's not going to update automatically. So don't freak out when you go to a different frame and nothing is happening. You just have to press F12 every time you change the frame, and then it will refresh. But you can see we do have some issues over here. If I go to my frame 540 and then F12, you can see where the markers start to reach the edge of the face and you have a background. The InPaint node pulls the information from the pixels all around it. And so that's why it's white here. It's pulling this white background information. And same thing here with the eye, it's pulling darker information there, and the nose here with the white as well. And we might have some and we might see that over here as well, although it's not as apparent just because it's really blown out over here. But the InPaint method works mainly the best when you just have somebody's face that doesn't really move and is kind of just looking straight towards the camera and not moving all around. But when you have footage like this where my head is moving all over the place, then you'll most likely need to use a couple different methods to remove markers on different spots. And so we're going to actually talk about the next one, and that is the beard problem that we have here, because the InPaint and blurring stuff works well on skin, but not so well on facial hair.